you very much, Saba. Great to be here. Thank you to Plum for inviting me. I'm fascinated by well-being in India. I've actually traveled there. I did a research project looking at how ideas of well-being and therapy are developing in India. So it's great to be here. I'm also fascinated by the links between Western and Eastern philosophies and how they can help us in everyday life. I'm going to share some slides. Let's just check. Yeah, I'm already made co-host. Okay. So what we're going to talk about is how philosophy can improve our life. And we're going to look at my talks in 4 sections. First of all, I'm going to talk about how our beliefs create our emotions, then how we can identify and change our beliefs. Then we're going to look at how we can become more resilient by focusing on what we can control in our life. And finally, we're going to talk about philosophy as a way of life, a kind of daily practice. I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, so 10 minutes on each of these sections. At the end of each section, I will ask if there's a question or two to Saba. So if you want to put questions in the chat, then I'll take some along the way, if there are any, and then we'll have 15 minutes Q&A at the end. So first of all, how our beliefs create our emotions. I want to start by talking about how I got into philosophy. So I didn't study philosophy at school or university. I came to it really out of necessity in my 20s. So in my late teens and early 20s, I started to develop bad anxiety, stress, social anxiety, panic attacks. It hadn't really affected me at all for the first 18 years of my life. And then suddenly my emotions were quite just difficult to deal with and made my first work, my first job very hard because I'd be very anxious in the office and in my kind of day-to-day work interactions. So I was trying to figure out what I could do about it, how I could, control or heal all these difficult emotions within me. And I looked around and I read widely and nothing really helped until finally I came across a type of therapy which actually helped me. It was called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Maybe some of you have heard of it. I went along to a CBT support group for people who suffered from bad anxiety. There was no therapist there actually, but someone had illegally downloaded a CBT course for anxiety from the internet. And so this group, we met up and we followed this course. We practiced the exercises. And after a few weeks, I stopped having panic attacks. And gradually, slowly, I understood how to change my emotions. So obviously, I was fascinated by this therapy, which had helped me and which has also helped millions of other people. In fact, in my country, the UK, my government has put £2 billion into making CBT free for anyone who wants it for depression or anxiety. So this is really the kind of gold standard of evidence-based therapy for lots of different emotional and behavioral problems. And I wanted to know who'd invented CBT. Where did it come from? I found out it had been invented by 2 American psychologists. On the left, that's Aaron Beck, and on the right, that's Albert Ellis. Both working separately had developed similar ideas in the 1960s, and it turned into CBT. So about 10 years ago, I went to interview Beck and Ellis. In fact, I did the last ever interview with Albert Ellis. He was literally on his deathbed in a hospital in New York. But I got to meet them and thank them for having invented this therapy, which helped me and millions of other people. And I asked them, where did you get the inspiration for CBT? Where did it come from? And both of them told me that their primary inspiration for CBT was philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy, and particularly a philosophy called Stoicism. They've been inspired by this quote from a Stoic philosopher called Epictetus, who lived in Rome in the 1st century AD. And Epictetus said, people are disturbed not by events, but by their opinion about events. So it's not what happens to you that causes suffering, it's how you think about it. This inspired Albert Ellis's ABC theory of the emotions, which really helped me to understand how my anxiety was arising. It's very simple, I'll explain it to you. A stands for the activating event, something that happens to you. B stands for your beliefs, how you interpret that event. And C stands for the consequent emotion that you feel. Now, often it feels like our emotions just happen automatically and involuntarily without any kind of choice. For example, you go into work on Monday and you see someone in the office, let's call them Margaret, and she's frowning. And you see that and you immediately feel hurt and offended and angry. It feels like that emotion just happens automatically and involuntarily. And if someone said, why are you in such a bad mood? You'd say, it's because of Margaret was frowning at me. It just feels like there's an action and a reaction. But what the ancient Greeks, the Stoics, would say is, wait a minute, slow down. Let's look at that. You interpreted that event a certain way. So don't forget the role of B, your beliefs, your perspective. You thought something like, Margaret is frowning at me. She's judging me. She's never liked me. Maybe she's a racist, or maybe she doesn't like men, or maybe she doesn't like people, you know, who look like me, or maybe she doesn't like me personally. For some reason, she's got it in for me. And that's so unfair. That's so outrageous. How dare she? So when you understand the role of B, your perspective, your interpretation, your story about reality, then you can hold it up to the light and examine B and say, is that definitely true? Is that definitely wise? Is that the right way to interpret that situation? What other ways might we interpret A? Or maybe Margaret's just frowning. Maybe she always is frowning. Or maybe she's got she's having a bad day and it's nothing to do with you. Or maybe it is to do with you and she really doesn't like you. But that doesn't mean you have to get angry and offended. Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can offend us without our permission. We can choose to see that situation in a different way. We could say, well, you know, so what? I'm not going to let that spoil my day. It might be nothing to do with me. And with that different interpretation, that different B, that will change your emotions. In psychology, this is called cognitive reappraisal. It's this extraordinary human ability which gives us the capacity to change our emotions. How? By changing how we interpret situations, how we think about them. So this is really at the heart of ancient Greek philosophy. The ancient Greeks say that philosophy can help us to cure our emotions, to help us gain better kind of serenity and calm. We can change how we feel by changing how we think, what we focus on, what we choose to care about. We have some control over our beliefs, our opinions, and that gives us some control over our emotions. How does this relate to me suffering from anxiety in my 20s? What I realized was my beliefs and values were causing my suffering. For example, I put a great emphasis on what other people thought of me. That was very important, that other people thought that I was always successful and popular and so on. So my reputation was very important to me. Too important, I put too much emphasis on it. And that philosophy, my beliefs and values, was causing my anxiety. And I arrived at this kind of epiphany. I'm doing this to myself. I'm causing my anxiety. My own beliefs are making me suffer. And I can change my beliefs because my beliefs are in my control. I can simply choose to care less what other people think about me. And that will change my anxiety and lower it. And that's precisely what happened. So this is the optimistic message that you can find in Greek philosophy and also in Indian philosophies like Buddhism or the Upanishads, that we can, to some extent, choose our life philosophy. We are not completely determined and automatic creatures. We have consciousness and choice. Now, the second section we're going to look at is how to identify and change our automatic beliefs. Sabra, are there any, is there a question in the chat? Or shall
no, not yet.
Not yet, okay. Now, the problem is, we've talked about you can change your emotions by changing your beliefs, your values. However, a lot of the time, your beliefs and opinions and values are unconscious and automatic. You're not totally aware of the story that you're telling yourself. So in CBT, this is an idea called self-talk. Self-talk is a kind of running commentary going through your head all through the day. This is good, this is bad, he looks scary, she looks nice, this interview is a catastrophe. All through the day, this kind of running commentary, slightly below your consciousness. Thousands and thousands of opinions, beliefs, and judgments. And we don't usually question this running commentary going through our head. We don't even really notice it. We assume that this running commentary, this self-talk, is totally accurate and true. And so we believe it, all these thoughts in our heads, when in fact, often our self-talk isn't actually accurate or true. It's not a very reliable news source. It often jumps to conclusions and doesn't check its facts. The Western teacher Eckhart Tolle said, most people completely identify with their thought stream. They think they are thinking their thoughts when really their thoughts are just automatically occurring. So these thoughts and judgments are popping into our head all the time, and we just accept them like they're totally true. We are kind of entranced in a dream of our automatic thoughts. You know, sometimes you might have a dream where you're being chased by enemies or something terrible is happening to you, and then you wake up and realize it's just a dream. But our waking reality is like that too, to some extent. We're in a dream of our automatic thoughts and judgments. This is what the Upanishads means when it says, we are like the dreamer who dreams a dream and then lives inside the dream. Socrates, the great Western philosopher, said, we are like sleepwalkers. We're just asleep in the dream of our automatic thoughts. So how do we wake up? How can we wake up from this trance of our automatic thoughts? First of all, we can realize we are not our thoughts. In psychology, this is called cognitive distancing. Just because a thought occurs in your head, you don't have to believe it or identify with it. You can learn to say, this is just a thought. Is it true or not? And you can also remind yourself that your thoughts and feelings are not always accurate and wise. Sometimes they're wrong. Our automatic mind jumps to conclusions which are often wrong. Our automatic mind evolved to help us survive. It didn't evolve to help us to be wise philosophers. So in CBT, they talk about something called cognitive biases, which are ways that your automatic mind might jump to conclusions about reality which are wrong. And you can learn to spot them in your own self-talk. For example, catastrophizing. This is when you jump to the worst possible conclusion. you're giving a presentation at work, say, and someone yawns in the front row, and you immediately, your automatic mind says, this is the most boring talk ever. This is a disaster. So you jump on a tiny bit of evidence and turn it into a big story. Or something called the fortune teller's error. Because, say, you're finding your job difficult at the moment, your automatic mind says to you, it's always going to be this difficult. Because you're unemployed at the moment, your automatic mind says you're always going to be unemployed. Because you're single, your automatic mind says, I'm always going to be single. So again, you take a little bit of evidence and turn it into a big generalization. Another is called the mind reader's error, which is jumping to conclusions about what someone else is thinking. You see Margaret frowning, and you immediately think, she hates me. I know she hates me. You don't check this judgment. You just assume that it's true. Or rating your life against others. You look at Instagram or at LinkedIn. Everyone else's life seems so wonderful, so perfect, whilst yours seems completely terrible. So again, you're jumping to a conclusion about what other people's lives are like, and actually not appreciating the blessings in your own life. All of this is a form of labeling. Labeling is when, instead of just saying, say, I did that particular project badly, you jump to an essential judgment about yourself. You say, I'm basically no good. Rather than just saying that presentation didn't go well, you say, I am no good at presentations. Again, a big generalization. So these are all forms of negative self-talk, which can cause us suffering, and we don't realize we're doing it to ourselves, as if we were slapping ourselves in the face, because it's often unconscious and automatic. We can be imprisoned by our automatic or inherited beliefs and values. But the good news is we can wake up to this and stop being so mean to ourselves in our automatic thoughts. How do we do this? So in ancient Greek philosophy, they teach, and in CBT, they teach the Socratic method. This is from Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, who would walk around Athens in Greece and engage people in conversation, ask them questions in order to get them to examine their automatic beliefs. He compared himself to a horsefly that stings a horse to wake it up. He said, the Athenian people are all asleep, and through my questions, I'm going to get them to wake up. So we can be Socrates to ourselves by asking ourselves questions. When you have a strong emotional reaction, you can go, wait a second, let me think about this belief or opinion. And then we can ask ourselves questions like Socrates here. This is a painting by Raphael. So what is the belief or opinion leading to this emotion? Is the belief definitely true? Is it definitely wise and accurate? Can I look for evidence? Can I check it out? Do I know this person hates me, for example? Have I asked them? Have I sometimes misinterpreted this kind of situation before? Have I sometimes jumped to conclusions in this kind of situation before? And finally, is there a way I could see this differently? Is there a wiser way I could look at this situation? Okay. Third, we're going to look at how we can focus on what we can control. I'm going to actually press on, Saba, just to make sure I cover everything before Q&A. This is a Stoic philosopher I mentioned previously, Epictetus. He wrote two wonderful books, by the way, the Discourses and the Handbook, which are two of my favorite books of philosophy that very much helped me when I had anxiety. And he's the greatest Western philosopher of resilience, how to be resilient in stressful situations. And his ideas in philosophy are actually taught in the US Army. They have a resilience training program for every American soldier using the ideas of Epictetus. Now, what's funny in a way is this great philosopher of inner freedom was a slave. He was born a slave in the Roman Empire. His name means acquired. Being a slave in the Roman Empire is potentially a very stressful situation. You have no freedom or control over your life. Your owner could beat you up or even kill you. And Epictetus's first owner was a real bully and actually beat him up so badly he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. That's why he's always pictured with this crutch. And yet Epictetus was not destroyed by this situation. He wasn't traumatized. He refused to be enslaved within. And instead he developed a philosophy of resilience. What Epictetus said was, the key to resilience is to know what you control in life and what you don't, and the difference between the two. He divided all of life into two spheres or zones. I call them zone 1 and zone 2. Zone 2 are the things in life over which we don't have complete control. What kind of things? Like the weather, the global economy, global politics. We have some control over these things, but only a little bit. Likewise, other people's opinions about us. Our boss, we have some influence over them, but to some extent they're beyond our control. Our body is also to some extent beyond our control. We can try to be healthy, but we all fall sick sometimes and we're all going to die. So all these things are in zone 2, according to Epictetus. We don't have complete control over them. He talks about everything in zone 2 is in the realm of fortune, constantly changing. This is the medieval figure, the wheel of fortune, who spins her wheels. So everything in zone 2 is changing. One moment you're very successful, the next moment you might be less so. One moment you're young and beautiful, but then as time goes on, you get older. One moment you might be very popular, the next less popular. Everything in zone 2 is constantly changing. It's never staying the same. This is something the Buddha also talks about. Everything changes in zone 2. What then do we have control over? What's in zone 1? According to Epictetus, the only thing that we really have control over is our own beliefs, how we think about zone 2. In zone 1, we are sovereign. We have the power to choose how we think. Epictetus thought that human suffering comes from 2 mistakes that we make. The first mistake is we try to exert complete control over something in zone 2. We say it must be a certain way. Albert Ellis called this masturbating. When you say something must be a certain way. For example, I must always be successful and it's a catastrophe if I'm not. Or I must always be in complete control and it's a disaster if I'm not. I must do every job perfectly, and if I don't, it's a catastrophe. You must always like me, or my boss must always approve of me, and if they don't, it's a catastrophe. So this way of thinking is trying to exert complete control over something in zone 2. It's trying to be a god, in other words, trying to say this is exactly how things must be in zone 2. But you're forgetting that zone 2 is the wheel of fortune. It's beyond your control. So if you say that something in zone 2 must be a certain way, that is a recipe for feeling out of control, frustrated, helpless, and at the mercy of circumstances. That's a recipe for making yourself the slave of fortune. For example, when I had bad anxiety, I thought other people must like me, and if they don't, it's a disaster. I must have the approval of other people. This was a recipe for anxiety because public opinion is always changing. other people's judgments are very fickle. They change all the time. It's beyond my control. So by me tying my self-esteem to other people's opinions, it was like me, tying my self-esteem to the stock market, to Bitcoin, for example. Every time Bitcoin goes up, you feel great. Every time Bitcoin goes down, you feel terrible. So it's the same thing to say, I will only like myself if other people approve of me. I was making myself the slave of fortune, the slave of other people's opinions. What's the antidote for this kind of thinking? It's very simple. Rather than saying, I'm only acceptable and worthwhile and lovable if I'm rich or powerful or popular or good looking, which are all in zone 2, you say, you shift your focus from zone 2, where you're kind of out of control, to zone 1, your own beliefs, your own opinions, which are always in your control. So I learned to say, for example, I would prefer if other people liked me, but to some extent that's beyond my control. I can choose to accept myself and like myself, no matter what other people think. When I started to think like that, immediately I felt less anxious and more just in control of myself. However, the second mistake people make is they fail to take responsibility for their own beliefs, for zone 1. Instead, they say things like, I had no choice but to lose my temper because of all the terrible things that happened in the world. Or, I had no choice but to be addicted to alcohol because of my terrible life. In other words, they use zone 2 as an alibi and don't take responsibility for their own thoughts and beliefs. Epictetus says, the robber of your free will does not exist. In other words, we always have power over our own beliefs if we choose to exercise that belief. He basically teaches us that what happens to you isn't necessarily your fault, but how you deal with it is your responsibility. Now, some people say, isn't this kind of philosophy apathetic and apolitical? Doesn't it teach people to be a doormat, to just accept whatever happens in zone 2 without trying to change it? Well, maybe, but in fact, some kind of great Stoic political leaders from history have taught that if you want to change the world, you need to be able to control yourself. You need to be able to control your own beliefs and opinions. So Nelson Mandela, for example, teaches us that if you want to try and change the world, you need to conquer yourself. It's what Gandhi teaches as well. If you want to change the world, you need to be able to control zone 1, your own beliefs and opinions. Okay. I'm coming to the end of the talk, so I'm looking forward to your questions. But the last thing I would like to teach is the idea of philosophy as a way of life. The ancient Greeks taught that philosophy can't just be something you talk about, something that you read in books. It needs to be a practice, a daily practice. Epictetus said, you may be fluent at philosophy in the classroom, but helpless in the street. So it's no good if your philosophy is just something you read about. How can we practice it in everyday life? How can we turn our ideas into habits? Ancient Greek philosophy is very much about developing strong habits. We are what we habitually do. Epictetus said, every habit is confirmed and grows in its corresponding actions. Walking by walking, running by running. Therefore, if you want to do something, make a habit of it. If you don't want to do it, make a habit of something else. So we need to habitually practice our philosophy every day to turn our ideas into automatic habits. And the ancient Greek philosophy has lots of different techniques for creating habits. Things like maxims. This is a technique to basically take a philosophy and turn it into like a catchphrase or soundbite that you repeat over and over until it becomes part of your self-talk. So Greek philosophy is full of these kinds of easy to memorize phrases. It's the same kind of thing in Buddhism and Hinduism, by the way. Another technique is the journal. Ancient Greeks say, at the end of every day, write down in a journal what you did that day. What did you do well? What did you do badly? To keep track of your habits and see if you're strengthening good habits and weakening bad habits. The ancient Greeks, like Buddhists and Hindus, also have visualization practices, ways of changing your perspective. One, for example, in Stoicism involves zooming out and seeing your life as if from outer space, or as if from the perspective of the cosmos, as a way to kind of, not make too big a deal of the immediate problems in your everyday life. There are also compassion practices. And then there's this idea of field work, this idea that you need to go out and challenge your fears in everyday life. And this is the last idea I want to leave you with. There's an idea in psychology called the confidence trap. Now, sometimes when we're thinking about starting a new project or developing a new skill, our automatic mind might say to us, I'm not going to try this until I feel more confident. So let's say you're thinking about starting your own business, but you say, you know what, I don't feel confident yet. I'll wait till I feel more confident. Or you're thinking about learning to drive or learning how to do public speaking, and your feelings are saying, oh, I wouldn't really do that. So you go, okay, I'll wait till I feel more confident. But this is actually a trap, because what actually happens is we gain confidence by doing. At the beginning, when you're developing a new skill, you don't feel confident. You feel like you're messing up. You feel like you're doing it terribly, but it's through doing that we change our beliefs and gradually get a feeling of confidence. So we have to, at the beginning, ignore our feelings, not listen to our feelings, even when they're telling us not to try something. It's through doing and through action that we develop confidence. So what we've looked at is how our beliefs create our emotions, how we can identify and change our beliefs using methods like the Socratic technique, how to focus on what we can control without fixating on what is beyond our control. And finally, this idea of philosophy as a way of life, as a daily practice, as an action. So thank you. I hope you